Hello, welcome to Ms.Curious. Today, let's talk about the moon landing. Between 1969, ooh, what an evil year, and 1967, Apollo program conducted 6 crewed landings on the moon, with 5 of them being successful. In total, 12 men worked on the moon during Apollo missions, and 24 astronauts traveled there in total. However, future Apollo programs and missions were cancelled in 1970. And in the past 50-plus years, humans had never ever stepped foot on the moon ever again. So there are craft ships from America, from China, from Russia have landed many times, but humans had not ventured out on the moon surface ever again. Why? What actually happened on the moon's surface? The first crew landed was Apollo 11, and it was humans' first landing on the moon, so NASA broadcast the whole event lively globally. Essentially, if a household has a television, it was very likely turned to the moon landing channel. It's like all the mankind were watching the Super Bowl or who woke up at the same time. And Apollo 11 back then was an event like that. Apollo 11 has 3 crew members. Number 1, Neil Armstrong. Of course, he's the most famous one, and he's the commander and the first person to walk on the moon. Number 2, Buzz Aldrin. He's the pilot and the second person to walk on the moon. And number 3, Michael Collins. He was the command module pilot. What if the secret thing happened behind the scene? What really happened during the trip to the moon? Are you curious? Let's dive into it. During the trip, Collins was the first person to spot some unidentified flying objects glowing and shaped like an arrow or a circle through the telescope. And he wondered if he was hallucinating in the space. So he quickly called Armstrong and Aldrin over, asking if they saw it too. Of course, they all saw it because it was real. So it was not a hallucination whatsoever. So they decided to keep it to themselves and not inform Houston. They chose to ignore the glowing object and figuring it was the best just to close their eyes and get some sleep.
We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically it becomes an unidentified flying object.
Well, that was a way to deal with it. Anyhow, the 3 of them agreed not to worry about it anymore temporarily. Until they woke up. When they woke up, they found that the unidentified flying object was disappeared. When the 3 of them finally found the predetermined landing site and were prepared to land, the spacecraft suddenly issued an alarm. The screen displayed an error code, it's 1202, and followed by another code, 1201. And they were surprised because despite all the extensive training and the thorough review of the operation menu, they had never ever heard of the error code 1202 or 1201. None of them knew what does this code mean. So at that time, the spacecraft kept alarming with a loud sound and flashing red lights, which was very frightening in space. Think about it. They quickly conducted base in Houston, and thousands of people at Houston base gathering together to discuss what the heck does 1202 mean and how to solve it. Meanwhile, Armstrong and his colleagues were also flipping through the flying menu, trying to figure out what the heck does this code mean. Still, no one could find any information about these codes. Houston got back to them saying that, well, no one really knew what was happening, and they had never heard of a code called 1201 or 1202. Actually, there was no such code in their procedures. The situation was agitated, and amid the confusion, the mission commander in Houston gave a decisive order. He told Armstrong to ignore the error codes and proceed with lunar landing. So, Armstrong executed order. He switched off the autopilot and switched to the menu control. They ended up landing 4 miles away from the planned landing site. Despite the deviation, they still managed to land successfully. At this point, Armstrong breathed a sigh of relief and reported to Houston with the famous saying, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle had landed."
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got...
And then here comes the significant moment. Neil Armstrong landed on the moon on June 20, 1969 as a part of Apollo 11 mission. He became the first human ever set foot on the lunar surface at 2017 UTC time. His famous first words as he stepped onto the moon's surface were, "That was a small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And his colleague pilot Aldrin joined him about 20 minutes later. Official words were, this sequence was planned to ensure that the landing and the subsequent steps were conducted safely, and it was according to mission protocols. But honestly, I think he may have done some quick makeup and polish up just to make sure the moon selfie looks cool. Anyhow, Armstrong and his fellow astronaut Buzz Aldrin spent about 2 hours and 15 minutes walking on the lunar surface, conducting experiments and collecting samples, and Michael Collins, the third member of the Apollo 11 crew, remained in a lunar orbit aboard the command module Columbia. Well, here comes the things people don't know. Armstrong and his crew members landed on the moon in the lunar module Eagle at 2017 UTC time, and Armstrong did not step foot on the lunar surface until 2:56 a.m. UTC time the very next day. So Armstrong waited approximately 6 hours and 39 minutes between landing the lunar module and stepping on the lunar surface. And those 6 hours did not go broadcast at all. What happened during those 6 mystery hours? The official statement was that Armstrong and Aldrin performed the various post-landing procedures, prepared their equipment, and ensured that everything was ready for their historic, epic moonwalk. But actually, right after landing, Armstrong reported to Houston saying, "The Eagle has landed in Tranquility Base." However, shortly afterwards, his colleague Aldrin shouted, "What is that?" He saw an unidentified light source and was very alarmed. Aldrin saw they had spotted an UFO and told Houston base, "You wouldn't believe it. We saw something on the moon." He described seeing several unidentified flying objects lined up on the other side of the crater as if they were watching them. Armstrong later recorded seeing 2 light sources which were positioned higher up, and this unusual situation led them to stay inside the lunar module for a full 6 hours before daring to step outside. Actually, the command center considered aborting the mission and had the astronaut return immediately. However, during those 6 hours, the astronauts realized something important. While these unidentified objects remained in place, they did not seem hostile. Eventually, they decided to proceed with their mission, but were extremely careful, extremely cautious when stepping out of, and that is why they waited for over 6 hours. And 10 years later, in 1979, one of the former NASA communication engineers who were responsible for the communication between Houston and Apollo 11 confirmed these events after his retirement. It was true. He revealed that everything said during the mission was recorded and was accurate. He mentioned that NASA staff knew all these incidents and details, but were not allowed to discuss them. It comes to the point that no one was either allowed or dared to talk about it. But the recordings and tapes of this conversation and some crucial footage of the moon landing have mysteriously disappeared. NASA later claimed that these recordings and tapes were lost due to poor management. What kind of poor management can happen in NASA that caused these kind of crucial documentations disappear? If NASA can lose it, don't worry, someone can help them to magically retrieve it. This man is called Edward Snowden. Over the past many years, there are so many speculations and conspiracy theories about the moon landing, saying it was all fake. Especially after Edward Snowden's event, he infamously claimed that the moon landing was a hoax. Shortly after Snowden's allegations, guess what happened? Yeah, NASA released the previous lost photos and videos, aiming to debunk Snowden's claims and prove the authenticity of the moon landing. This move also suggests that NASA's initial statement about the lost footage was untrue. It feels like NASA seems reluctant to make this information public from the beginning. Everything comes down to whether the government wants us to see something or not. If they want you to see it, they always find it and show it to you. If they don't want you to see it, there are countless ways to make anything disappear at any time.
My name is Donna Hare, and I worked at Philco Ford Aerospace. I was talking to one of the techs in there, and he drew my attention to a photograph. And I said, "Is that a dot on the emulsion?" And he said, and he's smiling, and he has his hands crossed, and he said, "Round dots on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground." And by its very nature, UFO, and that it was kept secret because I asked him, "What are you going to do with this piece of information?" And he said, "We always airbrush these out before we sell them to the public."
There's actually a little anecdote about this. After Armstrong walked on the moon, the live TV broadcast signal was interrupted for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. And during this time, they somehow missed the opportunity to run any advertisements, which could have been so lucrative. It's kind of trying to play an advertisement during the break of Super Bowl, but way more expensive. At that time, Armstrong urgently switched the channel to a medical frequency, a private channel not meant for public broadcast. And Houston base immediately understand why Armstrong did it and switched the feedback. However, during this interruption, some radio fans and technical experts managed to intercept the transmission using VHF receivers. According to those who intercepted the transmission, the communication ran something like this. Apollo 11, please respond. What's going on? Is there a problem? Astronaut says, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. There are other spacecraft out there lined up on the other side of the crater. They are watching us."
Spoke directly with the chief medical officer saying, "They're here, they're parked on the side of the crater, they're watching."
This incident sparked the speculation and the conspiracy theories. Although it's important to note that such claims has not been officially confirmed by NASA. Of course they wouldn't do it. Here comes a question to the aliens. Do you think their spacecraft were super cool looking or high tech? Well, regarding their spacecraft, whether it was particularly advanced or not is unknown. I think it is possible it was a large mothership. Armstrong and Aldrin reportedly saw these large craft. After returning to Earth, Armstrong made a notable decision. He declared he would no longer participate in space missions. Shortly afterwards, he resigned from NASA and pursued a career as a professor at a university. NASA requires that all individuals who have ever been to space cannot accept media interviews. Their speech and actions are strictly controlled. As a result, there are very few reports or interviews from astronauts or employees.
We have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
During the 40th anniversary ceremony of moon landing in 2009, Neil Armstrong finally disclosed that there were alien bases on the moon. He claimed that they have seen aliens during a pre-moon landing orbit around the moon, including top towers and the remnants of alien buildings and even mining equipment. Armstrong stated that the other two astronauts with him at the time also saw those things, and there were recordings and videos to prove what he said was true, and why he did not reveal this earlier. Armstrong implied that it was due to strict control on the speech and action of all former astronauts. He chose to disclose this information when he was seriously ill, and shortly after he revealed these informations, he passed away. Actually, Many individuals have come forward with disclosed information after they've retired, resigned, or near the end of their lives. And these disclosures often involve significant secrets previously kept under wraps, potentially due to non-disclosure or confidential agreements, which could lead to legal consequences or even substantial penalties if they violate. Neil Armstrong was not alone in this regard. In total, about 25 individuals who have been to space have either hinted or reported seeing UFOs. Of the 3 astronauts who first landed in Moon, the other 2 besides Armstrong also have noticeable pasts after return from the Moon. Buzz Aldrin struggled with depression and alcoholism after his mission. He also devoted and pursued God and became a Christian minister. While some people say he went cuckoo, what happened to him will make him mad? That was a great question. We all know astronaut selection process is extremely rigorous. Those who qualify to finally become astronaut must undergo systematic and strict training in all aspects, including psychological, mental, physical, all aspects. And think about this. What kind of experience or trauma will cause such a capable astronaut to go insane? By the way, is there anyone curious what happened to Michael Collins? He became the longest man in history because he solely orbited the moon while his mates were chilling on the moon's surface.